Hello, I'm Dr. Helen Wells and I'm a Senior Lecturer in Criminology at Keele University and I specialise in roads policing research.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gemma Briggs. I'm a cognitive psychologist based at the Open University and I specialise in research on distracted driving.
Our presentation today is based around research we've conducted independently and a more recent research project funded by the Road Safety Trust we completed together, which looked at mobile phone use by drivers. The aim of that work was to support the National Police Chiefs Council mobile phone enforcement campaign that took place earlier this year. But we're certainly not all about enforcement, so here's our thoughts on what we know about the dangers of driving while using a mobile phone, why this knowledge meets resistance, that is why people seem reluctant to accept it, and what we might be able to do about it. So the presentation will combine research on the actual effects of distraction by Dr. Briggs up first, with research into the best ways of translating the research findings into policy and practice by myself. The aim is to suggest ways in which we all, from our various positions, can deter drivers from engaging in distracted driving. Gemma, over to you.
So what should phone-using drivers know? Well, based on several decades of research in this area, we can confidently conclude that drivers using their phones are around 4 times more likely to be involved in a collision than drivers who don't use their phones. And this effect lasts for around 5 minutes after that phone conversation has ended, suggesting that it's more of a cognitive issue than perhaps a purely manual one. They're also far less likely to notice and react to hazards. And those hazards that they do notice, they take significantly longer to react to, which has an obvious impact on stopping distances. Distracted drivers will often show poor lane discipline and will make more variable speed choices. We've probably all seen drivers who seem to randomly speed up and slow down, and this might be due to the various demands of their conversation. They'll also use compensatory strategies, which is a polite way of saying that they won't use their indicators and they won't check their mirrors. And this, of course, has an issue in terms of the driver being aware of everything that's going on around them. And finally, none of these factors are improved by using a hands-free phone. All of the research in this area has emphatically demonstrated that the issue with mobile phone use by drivers is that it's cognitively demanding and it takes attention away from the driving task. So how big of a problem is it? Well, when we look at contributory factors for incidents which have been attended by a police officer, we can get some idea of the scale of recorded phone use. But there are still several questions left to be asked based on this information. So this chart here shows data for 2019, where there were 637 recorded incidents where a mobile phone use was recorded as a contributory factor. And that's represented by the small red bubble to the bottom right with the number 637 in it. Now, these are only incidents that were attended by police officers and where mobile phone use, handheld of course mobile phone use, was demonstrable. So it's very likely that these numbers are a vast underestimate of the number of real incidents that actually occur and involve a mobile phone. So this could suggest, this number of 637 could suggest that it isn't much of a problem in the grand scheme of things, particularly when you look at some of the other bubbles in this diagram. For example, if you look at alcohol, where there's over 6,000 incidents that are recorded. Nevertheless, 143 people in the UK in 2019 were either seriously injured or killed in an incident involving a mobile phone. And we still know that 5 people are dying every day on UK roads. So it's definitely an issue that we need to address. We also know that self-reported mobile phone use is increasing, in some age groups up to a 50% increase. But what I find particularly interesting about this chart is the orange bubbles that represent driver error. Now, 2/3 of all incidents in 2019 were attributed to driver error. The largest subcategory of that is failure to look properly. Now, research on phone use by drivers can provide evidence-based explanations for both how and why many of the incidents that are currently attributed to driver error, including failure to look, could actually be explained by phone use. Including those who are legally using hands-free phones. The reason behind this is that our research and that of many others have been able to demonstrate that the cognitive distraction imposed by phone use can actually affect your visual perception. one of the best ways to explain some of the research findings in this area is to get people to experience things for themselves. So in this very short video that I'm going to show you, I'd like you to simply count how many cars you see. Now, if you didn't notice the sign changing, you'd be in good company. With demonstrations like this, often around 40% of viewers won't notice a change that happens. And in this case, of course, the answer appeared on the signpost partway through the film. Now, this demonstrates the phenomenon of inattention blindness. So you're looking directly at the scene the whole time, but because your attention is focused on counting the cars, you can fail to notice other quite salient things in the scene, even if they happen right in front of your eyes. If you've seen a demonstration like this before, you might well have been expecting the sign to change, but perhaps you didn't necessarily notice the other changes that occurred as well. So this shows that previous experience with a task like this doesn't necessarily prime you to notice other changes. Now, inattention blindness underpins our research in this area, and we've been able to demonstrate that drivers who are engaged in a mobile phone conversation, either handheld or hands-free, can indeed demonstrate inattention blindness. So what does this mean in terms of research findings and real-world practice? Well, some inconvenient research findings that have come out of the Open University in collaboration with Graham Hole at the University of Sussex. We've demonstrated that there are issues with situation awareness when a driver is using the phone. So by situation awareness, we mean the experience of being able to keep track of your own vehicle and movements of other road users. So a good driver needs to be able to do that, to know what's going on around them. To do that, we tend to make predictions and very fast-paced decisions, and we tend to rely quite a lot on our previous experience of driving to help us make those kind of decisions, which makes a lot of intuitive sense. But phone users seem to have reduced situation awareness, so that might be due to factors such as, not monitoring the environment effectively. So as I said at the start, not using their mirrors, for example. But in some of our research, we were able to demonstrate that actually what's going on is that phone using drivers are over-relying on what they expect to happen in normal driving at the expense of them not noticing unexpected things. So in effect, they have an attentional set for driving that they were relying on. And we tested this by providing different driving video clips and asking participants if they saw anything unexpected appear on the screen, anywhere on the screen, to react, to hit the brake pedal. And these unexpected items could either be road signs or smiley faces, and they could appear at the centre or various sides of the screen. Now, we chose smiley faces because these are things that previous research has shown tend to capture attention. What we found was that those of our participants who were also having a hands-free phone conversation noticed far fewer unexpected items overall compared to non-phone using participants, but they were more likely to notice those unexpected items that were relevant to the task of driving, i.e. the road signs, and they were far less likely to notice the smiley faces, even when they appeared directly in front of them. And we think this is because they tend to over-rely on what they expect to happen in normal driving. In a normal driving experience, you would expect to see road signs. That would be part of your attentional set. But when you're driving normally, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see a smiley face pop up. So it seems that these things aren't receiving enough processing to reach conscious awareness. And this again demonstrates inattentional blindness. We've got focused attention going on to the detriment of noticing things that are happening right in front of their eyes.
Thank you, Gemma. So we know that mobile phone use is distracting. We have plenty of evidence that demonstrates that, but we also know that telling people this hasn't caused them to switch their phones off. So we're going to look at the issue of driver resistance from the perspective of means, motive and opportunity, but we're going to start with motive. So what we need to understand first is why people want to use their mobile. What makes them put themselves in the red and yellow circles of Gemma's graphic despite the statistics? We need to understand what is driving use to understand how we might challenge it. What do drivers think they would lose then if they stopped using their phone? And I think it's worth noting this is not just confined to our imagined driving population outside of this room. People, lots of people, do not want to believe that hands-free mobile phone use in particular causes a distraction. They may be prepared to accept that handheld use does, but they are very open to alternatives that allow them to still get the benefits of mobile phone use while driving without the risks of being caught. So our first relevant concept in terms of the motive for using your phone is FOMO, fear of missing out. This is about the stress caused by not being in constant contact. This might be social, for example, the anxiety caused by thinking that stuff is going on your social media account you're not seeing, that someone has Instagrammed their new eyebrows or a picture of their dinner or something equally exciting. But the very real anxiety that's bred from being used to being in constant contact and from other people's expectations that you'll be in constant contact. When drivers have been asked about their mobile phone use, they often talk of FOMO, of being unable to resist the ping of a message, being unable to resist a quick scroll at the traffic lights, and being twitchy when they're separated from their phone or asked to turn it off. Indeed, some research has suggested these are characteristic of addiction. Related to this is the explanatory concept of the acceleration society. This is a problem that takes this concept into the professional life as well as your personal life. The concept describes how the pace of life has increased, the sense that if you're not making progress, you feel like you're slipping behind, that others are stealing an advantage. Research with drivers caught using their phone by our colleague Leanne Savigar-Shaw demonstrated this sense that there's never enough time in the day, that our colleagues or bosses expect us to be reachable, and if they're not, they might find someone who is, that our families might need us, etc. That idea that if we can just finish that email, have that catch up with Sandra, do our big shop whilst we are driving, we'll free up time for other things, we'll steal a march, that we can make time spent driving more rewarding by doing something else at the same time. And then that sense becomes normal. So if someone, like us, like the government, tries to stop us doing this, we can't cope, we fall behind. We start to factor that into our day. So thirdly, in terms of the motive for resisting the research evidence, we have the idea that it actually doesn't cause many deaths. It can't be that dangerous. Only 40 people a year die doing it. Reporting fairly recently of the hands-free issue included references to there being only 40 deaths. This implies a tolerance for this kind of death because it's a trade-off with things we think we feel we have to do or that we really want to do. There is some kind of mental fatality balance sheet going here that is weighing up productivity versus peril, or the benefits of generating revenue versus risk. And we see this reflected in government comment on this too. So last year, after the Transport Committee inquiry into mobile phone use, the government's response included a reference to the need to take urgent calls, really important calls on your mobile. So really balancing that idea of distraction and productivity. So in the last example of motive, we see attempts to undermine the research in this area because use matters to drivers. They want to be able to resist it. They're motivated to go and find a motive to resist it. They suggest these new forms of distraction are actually no different to age-old ones, that no one's suggesting we ban, like chatting to a passenger or having kids in the car. But again, the solid research to explain why this is different. Thanks, Gemma.
So the argument that hands-free phone use is the same as talking to a passenger is a very common challenge that is made when we talk about research in this area, and it's a very obvious challenge. The issue seems to be that a passenger has a shared environment with the driver. They're within the vehicle. They can see what the driver can see. They can see what pressures the driver is facing, and they can regulate their conversation accordingly. They might even help the driver by pointing out things that they haven't seen. But crucially, they can stop demanding the driver's precious attention when is needed. Conversation on the phone in comparison, your conversation partner doesn't have the benefit of that shared environment. But some of our research has further suggested that when you're talking to someone on the phone, you tend to create mental images of where that person is, what they're discussing, what they're up to. And we know from previous research that when you create these mental images in your brain, it makes use of the same cognitive resources and the same brain areas that are needed for accurate visual perception. Now, this is explained in this BBC Ideas video that we made, so do please have a look if you're interested. But in our research, we were able to track our participants' eye movements to see exactly where they were looking and for how long. And what we found was that our distracted participants, those who were having a hands-free mobile phone conversation, looked at an area of the driving scene 4 times smaller than our undistracted participants. And they tend to focus their attention in a highly concentrated area directly ahead of them. So the 2 images that you see on the screen, the one on the left with lots of the yellow dots, is an undistracted driver, and each of those yellow dots represents a visual fixation, a point at which the eye is paused to take in some information. And the image on the right is of a distracted driver. And looking at the same scene of this car at the last minute joining the stream of traffic. Now, a distracted driver is looking at a highly concentrated area directly ahead of them and not really noticing things going on in the peripheral areas in comparison with our undistracted driver. Worryingly, what we found was that if we introduced a hazard at the point where those eye movements were recorded, so we knew where our participants were looking, distracted drivers were significantly less likely to notice them. Again, this is inattention blindness at play, and these are known as looked but failed to see errors. So basically, our research, and this has been replicated by others, has been able to demonstrate that drivers who are talking on the phone can look directly at hazards, yet not see them. This is a particular problem for peripheral hazards, largely because our dual-tasking drivers tend not to look to the peripheral areas. And if you think about what kind of peripheral hazards there might be, a child stepping off a pavement, a car joining a stream of traffic, all of these things can have serious implications.
So, pretty persuasive stuff. Why doesn't that do the job? What do we know about how drivers think that can help us here? Having found a motive for resisting the evidence, they really, really want to use their phone, so they're inclined to look for a motive. How do they then find the means to do that? How do they find the actual strategies and resources to help them resist the research evidence? What is it about driver psychology that helps us unpick this problem a bit further? What we have here is the fundamental problem that drivers don't think anything bad is going to happen to them. Most of the time, they're right, of course. So every time they get in a car and speed or tailgate or use their phone and nothing happens, nothing bad happens, the idea that they can do 2 things at once is reinforced. So similarly, news about other people who didn't get away with it, it doesn't help. Those shocking, tragic cases of victims and their families that we want to use to get across to people the seriousness of what they're doing, they don't necessarily hit home. Perhaps even they just prove that those other people weren't as skilled as we are because they didn't get away with it. And so far, we have. And this isn't a small problem confined to a few drivers. Research consistently finds 80% or more of drivers rate their own abilities as above average. Now, I'm no fan of numbers, they're not my particular friends, but even I can see something isn't right there. What this means is that drivers see other people die doing what they do, but they don't relate that to themselves. They may even support campaigns aimed at that behaviour whilst continuing to do it themselves, the hypocrisy point on the slide. Many of the projects I've been involved in that talk to drivers about their offending reveal this kind of dual thinking that is critical of offending by others, but justifies it for ourselves. So we absolutely have to try to overcome that. And Gemma has some great resources for doing that show drivers their own response to distraction, not someone else's, their own.
So how can we communicate these inconvenient research findings to the general public or to other specific audiences? Well, one way that we've found that works quite well is to kind of gamify this research. So what we've done is we've created some evidence-based interactive activities that are freely available to everyone. The one on the left has been running for just over a year. It's called Are You a Focused Driver? And much like the animation that you watched at the start where you were focusing your attention with the counting task, participants for this task will complete a series of individual tasks of noticing changes, of noticing hazards. And then at the end, they'll see how well they've done. The one on the right is just about to be launched. It's the Mobile Office Challenge, and again it looks at hazard perception, but it's more focused on what that means in terms of your productivity and how well you perform if you're trying to use your car as a mobile office. The important thing about education of this sort is that it's engaging, it feels non-judgmental, and it, as I said, it gamifies the research to make it more kind of immersive, so people can actually experience distraction for themselves.
Now the final part of the three, opportunity. Drivers can readily find a motive. They like using their phone. They need to use their phone. And the means comes from their belief in their own abilities to handle it. Here we see, though, a shift in the narrative to one looking at the wider signals about mobile phone use, the ones you can get from society around you. And here the law is implicated because it gives the impression that hands-free use must be safe. After all, it's legal. This then provides drivers who want to use their phone, brackets need to use their phone, with the opportunity to do it. Not just the legal get out, but the defence they can get in first. If it was dangerous, it would be illegal. So the focus here is on what you can get away with, what you're allowed to do, rooted in the idea that the consequences of use are actually only going to be legal. They're not safety related for the reasons we've just seen. People don't believe that the consequences of using their mobile phone are going to be crashing. They barely believe they're going to get caught. But it's a different kind of safety here, a safety that's rooted in the risk of enforcement, not the risk of crashing. If you don't think you're going to crash, then you don't worry about crashing. You just worry about the legal implications, meaning you're tempted to then game the law, look for loopholes, as in our second point here, where the safety implications are skipped over. And as we've been asked by people throughout our projects, by people outside and inside the road safety world, can they do you for, can I do X or Y? What if I have my phone but it's in a crib? What if I do this? Can they do you for that? What if I'm using my phone as a map? Looking for loopholes in the legislation that allow them to carry on doing something they want to do. It's the idea, I think, that people want to know if they can do something, not if they should do something. And here the current law, as we've said, is very unhelpful to us. It's out of date. It was invented in 2003, where, as we've said before, a mobile phone was nothing more really than a telephone, a text message machine, and you could play a game of Snake if you wanted to. But the law can never keep up with technology anyway. At present, it gives the impression that some things are safe because if they were dangerous, they'd be illegal, right? Actually, what our current law does is provide people with a legal rather than an illegal way to die. So, given all this, what can we do about it? The law gives a strong signal to society about what's acceptable and what isn't, but in our case, it gives the wrong signal, particularly if people are motivated to look for reasons that allow them to carry on behaving as they want to, as we've seen in this case. We're not saying a new law on its own is a solution. Shock horror, people don't always obey laws, but the law as it stands is certainly part of the problem. We also need to move away from that idea, including promoted by the government, that some mobile phone use for urgent calls or when you really need to is okay, that it's worth it if it helps your business run better or if it allows you to address a really important problem. We also think that we need ways to persuade drivers that this does mean them, that it's not just other people who get distracted and they've really just been lucky up to now. Showing them other people crashing or dying doesn't overcome that idea that a good driver, and let's remember they all pretty much think that's them, can handle it. Gamification, we're suggesting, lets them experience it for themselves, as Gemma's resources showed. So it's less able to be resisted as being about other people. You've experienced it, it does apply to you. Thirdly, we think we need to be able to change the way the police report driving offences and enforcement ops. We're not saying we shouldn't talk about detections, tickets, arrests even, but we should do it alongside some contextualisation that shows actually this is not majority behaviour. People do it, but they're not normal. This helps challenge the idea that we met back at the start, that where drivers fear they're losing out because they see other people getting jobs done on the move and they're not. And the fact that some people get caught, that will work for those that are only deterred by the likelihood of punishment. We flagged up a couple of tweets here on the slide here that we think do this nicely. They highlight the ones that got caught, the minority, and they thank the ones, the majority, that didn't need police attention. We need to make the most out of that social norms effect, I think, with data that shows most people don't do these dangerous things, even if we think that everybody's at it. Make it okay to refuse to take calls while you're driving. Make it okay to have an auto response that says, I'm sorry, I'm driving, I'll get back to you. Make it okay to challenge use and to resist pressure. And then we need to make sure we use contemporary, accurate and inclusive imagery in our communications. And this is probably one of the easiest ones to address. If a truth is unpalatable and inconvenient, like the one we're talking about here, we will look for ways to dismiss it. So here it's a phone that looks like no phone anyone has anymore. It doesn't even look like a phone. And it can't do all those tempting things that we've talked about, like allow you to do your big shop or surf your social media. Sure, I won't use a phone that looks like that, but I haven't got a phone that looks like that. But this one, that looks like my phone, perhaps it is talking to me. And here we have a person in another example talking on their phone by holding it to their ear. Remember when we used to do that? We need to make sure our campaign imagery reflects phones and phone use as it is today. And this guy, well, he's got a left-hand drive car and an old flip slidey phone. I don't drive a car like that or have a phone like that. Maybe it doesn't apply to me. Maybe I don't want it to apply to me, and this is my get out. So we know a lot about how the brain works. We know what it can and can't do and what it tries to get us to believe. And we know that when people don't see laws as legitimate or don't want to see them as legitimate, they won't obey them and they will look for ways to get around them. Let's use that insight to inform what we do.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to know more, please do get in touch or download our link to the Mobile Engage Compendium, which we produced with our colleague, Dr. Leanne Savagar-Shaw, where you can find 160 pages of ideas like we've been talking about and case studies for preventing mobile phone use by drivers.